So it's the biggest iceberg in the world at the moment. It was around 4,000 square kilometres last year, but it's been melting ever since, and so it's down to about 3,500, but that's still more than bigger than any other bergs in the world. And they're quite rare. So megabergs of this scale do come loose, particularly from the Weddell Sea, but on the scale of a few a decade. So I was on the Sir David Attenborough when we encountered it back in 2023, and it's amazingly impressive. It's a 40-metre high wall of ice stretching from one horizon to the other. It's actually really hard to get an impression of just how big it is, but it's a phenomenal thing to see. And at the moment, it's sitting in one of these jets and meandering its way towards South Georgia. So it's taking a sort of a circuitous path, but the jet will take it to the island in the next 3 to 4 weeks. It is melting, and when these icebergs melt, they eventually fracture into many, many smaller bergs, and at that point melt relatively quickly. If it does ground, it could conceivably be quite a problem for the breeding seals and penguins that live on the southern side of South Georgia, simply because it'll be in their way on their paths to their feeding areas, which means there could be an increase in mortality for chicks and pups, which are currently being fed by their parents. We've had around 3 of these bergs in the last 5 years, and prior to that, maybe 1 or 2 a decade. So it's not a particularly common occurrence. It is a natural phenomenon. But what we do know is that the Antarctic ice shelves are melting. Since 2020, over 6 trillion tonnes of ice has been lost from the Antarctic ice shelves. This iceberg is roughly 1 trillion tonnes of fresh water, which can have a really significant local effect on both the oceanography, the physics, and the biology and biogeochemistry. On a larger scale, though, we know that the melting of the Antarctic ice shelves is basically allowing more of the ice on the Antarctic continent to flow into the ocean, which increases sea level. So the biggest uncertainty for future sea level is really what the Antarctic will do. Pretty impossible to give a definitive answer as if an individual event is climate change related, but what we do see is the amount of ice increasing since we've been monitoring it, the amount of ice loss that is. I think these icebergs really act as like a microcosm of the wider Southern Ocean, and it allows us to study things like the biological carbon pump, so the drawdown of carbon from the atmosphere into the ocean by biology. These icebergs act to stimulate phytoplankton blooms as well, so they can be really exciting laboratories for our scientists.